So welcome everybody. Keep eating and take seconds. Actually, we have plenty of food. As I said to somebody, we know the way to your heart, but we also know the way to your mind. And we have actually a very interesting presentation. And so I'm only going to say a few words by way of introduction, both of the series and of the program on the legal profession, and then of our distinguished speakers, so that we'll have lots of time both to hear from him and also for question and answer. So my name is David Wilkins. I'm the director of the program of the legal profession and a professor of law here. And for the last few years, we've had a weekly speaker series, usually on Tuesdays, but the day varies depending, of course, on the availability of our speakers, in which we are trying to bring leading practitioners and also leading academics and scholars and other people interested in the profession to come have an informal discussion with you about what they do and about what the issues are. I don't think it will come as a surprise to any of the students in the room that this is a time of tremendous change in the profession, and all of you are going to have lots of choices to make about what kinds of careers you want to pursue, not just immediately after law school, but throughout the arc of your professional career. Actually, one message that we have here that we really want to get across is, don't just focus on your first job when you're here. Think about how you're going to build a successful, rewarding, meaningful career in the law. And there's no better way to think about that than to have people who have accomplished that goal to come in and spend some time with you. And the people who come in our series really are quite remarkable, and they're very generous. As Al will, I'm sure, confirm, we don't give them any money to come here. They come here on their own dime. They take
free lunch.
Yeah, free lunch. There you go. Well, we know the way to his heart too. They take time out of an incredibly busy schedule, and they all agree to be as open and candid as they can be, and to engage in the questions that you are interested in. If you like today's lecture, and if you're interested in more of the things that we're doing, I hope you'll sign up on the sign-up sheets, which just is a way for us to send you emails about previews of coming attractions. And it's not just our speaker series, but we're planning a series of conferences. We're probably going to do something on global pro bono in the spring, for example. We're going to do something on innovation in legal services also in the spring. We're probably going to do something around our project on globalization, lawyers, and emerging economies, or GLE as we like to call it, around what's happening in places like India and China and Brazil and South Africa and other important parts of the world. So there's a lot of things that we have planned, and we'd love to get you notice of them. And also, if you're interested in working with us in any way, I hope you'll let us know, because we have, we use students as research assistants. They help us put on conferences. We've got a blog going. We have lots of ways in which we engage students, and we'd love to work with all of you. So that's the background on me and on the program and on the profession. Let me just say very briefly, we are very, very honored to have Albert P. Parker II to come and be with us today. Al is the Executive Vice President and General Counsel and Corporate Secretary of Sunovion Pharmaceuticals, which he will tell you a lot about, but he's in a very interesting role because he's the worldwide General Counsel living in Philadelphia of a company that's headquartered here outside of Boston, but is owned by Japanese. So it's a very global life that he's living. He'll tell you a little bit about how he manages that, how he got into this job and into a general counsel's job, and a little bit about his career, and answer any other questions you have. So without further ado, you didn't come to hear me, you came to hear Al. Thank you very much.
David, thank you very much. I was listening to your introduction there. That was essentially my presentation, so preemptive. So, awesome, Derek, thank you very much. As I understand, this is the relatively new director of the program at Legal Profession. So
still finding my way here.
Okay, well, good. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to come here today. And the one thing that I really want to leave with you is encapsulated in this quote from JFK, and that is essentially to embrace change. What is going to take place with respect to your careers at this point is unimaginable. I've been practicing, not that old, I've been practicing law for about 23 years. Graduated law school in 1990. When I first started as a summer associate, when I first started working in different law firms, it was not uncommon for partners' desks not to have computers. And you think about the change that we've seen in just that relatively brief period of time. I can only anticipate that it's likely that the pace of change is going to just increase going forward, and that some of the issues that you're going to be dealing with when you find yourselves mid-career will make the issues that I'm struggling with seem small in comparison. Yeah. Just a brief overview. Part of the reason why I think there's going to be a lot of significant change in the industry is that right now we have somewhere around 1.2 million lawyers licensed here in the U.S. That's a rough figure. It's somewhere right. It's a lot of lawyers. What we're also seeing is that there are about 45,000 law graduates annually. Complicating that whole thing is that we're making more lawyers than we're making jobs. So what you have is a lot of people out here who have legal training, who have interest in the legal system or legal in the legal field, who are not necessarily going to be able to follow the typical route where you go to law school, then you go out and go find a job and move forward from there. What I can see from where I sit is that there are going to be some very significant changes, not just in private practice, not just in-house, but also even in the legal training process. I know there's been a lot of discussion about whether the third year of law school is even necessary anymore. I don't know if any of you are third years, but that is something that might go away. You also look at private practice. There have been a number of articles written, a number of books written regarding some of the significant changes that are going to happen in big law. Frankly, a lot of those, the pictures that's being painted in those books and articles is pretty bleak. It's the two of them that I just highlight here for you. If you haven't read them, it's just worth the effort just to go out and find them. The first one is Tomorrow's Lawyers, Introduction to Your Future. That book is really focused on the impact that IT or technology is going to have on the practice of law. The other one has to do with the last days of big law. Was an interesting article. I was actually on vacation this summer. I was on the beach and vacationing with a friend of mine, happens to be a partner at a big Wall Street law firm. I was watching him read this thing, and you could just see his face drop. I said, "Man, what are you reading?" So he forwarded it to me, and I completely understood. It's an interesting article. That's one. They talk about the cultural shift inside of law firms. There's one law firm, a big Chicago law firm, that they really do an in-depth review of, and it's I have to tell you, it's chilling. I don't necessarily share such a pessimistic view of what the future of legal practice is going to be like, because there will always be a need for sophisticated legal support. The issues that we're dealing with in business are more complex than ever, are more challenging than ever. I think the penalties, the fines, things like that we're seeing are more significant than anything we've ever dealt with in the past. So we are going to need very competent, very skilled lawyers to be able to help us with those things. But undoubtedly, there are going to be very significant changes or impacts to the profession. So it's that the practice of today clearly is not going to be what we're going to see tomorrow. Now, rather than talk about changes in the industry in general, as Professor Wilkins mentioned, I think that could be the subject of a number of these types of programs, just focus on those issues. What I'm going to talk about is just the very discrete subsection of that, and that's to talk about the in-house practice of law in a global corporate setting. Before I get I think we sold this, or we build this presentation today as practice competencies. I know you're all here looking for some practical, real-world advice. I will give that to you as best I can. But before that, I also wanted to just spend a little bit of time talking about what I do as a general counsel, what my path to becoming a general counsel was, and also just what are some of the core competencies, or what are some of the attributes that I think, in-house counsel have today and will continue to need tomorrow. After that, I'll also spend a little bit of time talking about some of the business trends that I see coming that are going to have an impact on the practice of law, and then we'll get to the practice competencies. Now, I'd like to say that I had some master plan when I started my career. I really did not. I tend to look at my career kind of like 3-year chunks, 5-year chunks. So after law school, I joined a law firm. It was actually a big law firm here in Boston, but I started my travel early because I was based in D.C., so even then, it was a 6:50 a.m. Delta shuttle. I would catch up here once or twice a week, back and forth to Boston. But in private practice, it's a great training ground. So I know for many people, the idea of going to work for a big law firm is not particularly appealing, and undeniably, it can be a grind at times, just some of the work you're being asked to do, the hours you're being asked to put in. But you're working with some of the best lawyers you could possibly work with, and it really is a great training opportunity. So made my way up through private practice, ended up becoming a litigation partner at a national law firm. Shortly after becoming a partner, I left to go in-house. And it was, at the time when I went in, I told one of my mentors at the firm that I was thinking about leaving. He essentially looked at me like I had grown another head, because that was something that people just did not do at the time. This is in the late 90s. So the idea that you would give up a law firm partnership to go in-house just seemed odd. Nowadays, it's much more common. I think there's much more mobility, even at the partnership ranks, than what you're seeing in the past. But anyway, joined an in-house legal department in a litigation role. Was there for a short period of time before that company was taken over, and then joined another pharma company. But this time it was in a non-litigation role. They asked me to come in, essentially be their general corporate lawyer for a business unit. And then over the next 10 years or so, that role expanded from being a business unit then to responsibility for North America, so Canada, US, and Puerto Rico. Then it expanded to be the Americas, so it had everything from Canada down to Argentina. And then ultimately ended up in the global chief counsel role there, where I had global responsibilities for I guess it was about a $20 billion business. So again, I'd like to say that that was purposeful. That was something that I set out to do, but it really was not. But again, it was as opportunities came available to me. It's just the idea of being open, being flexible, and just being willing to try something different. So to Professor Wilkins' point again, as far as when you graduate law school, the idea of having one goal that you are unwilling to veer from, I just, one, I don't know how realistic that is in today's world, but number two, you really don't know where it's going to take you. After working in-house for, I guess it's about 13, 14 years, my company was taken over again by the same company, Pfizer. But so after that, though, it's, the last probably 5 years that I was working for the big pharma company, I spent an inordinate amount of time out of country focused on the emerging markets. As the company was entering into, or they were seeking growth, they had pretty much concluded that the U.S. market was pretty much maximized, the Western European market, some of the more traditional markets where we had done business. We were looking at a pretty flat growth trajectory there, so that's where we decided to get into emerging markets. The management team had the foresight to say, okay, as we move into these new emerging markets with our business, it makes sense to set up the legal infrastructure along at the same time. So that was really a key part of my responsibility. So in all these places, the Brazil, the Russia, the India, the China, Costa Rica was a very good assignment. Spent a lot of time down there setting up an office, but spent, again, based here in the U.S., but spent an awful lot of time ex-U.S. Anyway, in the course of all of that, what struck me is that there were some real inefficiencies with respect to how corporations were able to purchase legal services. So after leaving the in-house position, I was a founder and a principal of a company that really had an alternative legal services delivery model. What we did there, and I'll talk about it a little bit later. What we did there was for a number of companies that needed senior level legal support, but either couldn't afford to bring in a general counsel, or they really couldn't afford to pay for senior level outside counsel support. We developed a model where we were able to allow people to essentially have us come in, serve as their outside counsel for a rate that's much less than what they would pay outside counsel, but they didn't have to absorb those fixed costs. So we did that for about 3 years until my current position. They came knocking on the door, and it's as my mother always says, it's even as a baby, I couldn't stay in one place for so long. And this is kind of the same situation. It's a good opportunity, and off we went. In talking about the in-house counsel position, there are certain skills and attributes that I think are just absolutely critical, because when you serve in an in-house capacity, you're wearing kind of two hats, because you're integrated with the business. So you have a very keen understanding of what the business goals are, the strategies, the tactics, the culture of the company, the industry, the competitors, things like that. But you're also the on-staff legal expert. So you're still very much up to speed with the developments in the law and the regs and things like that. So you are squarely at the point where the business issues and the legal issues come together. It's a fantastic place to be, because it allows you to kind of have a foot in both sides of the table, or whatever the analogy you want to be. The one thing that I think is very difficult as an in-house lawyer is that it can be difficult at times to maintain your sense of detachment. So you're able to apply that independent judgment that you need to be able to apply in guiding your clients for a number of reasons. One, these are your colleagues. So this is not a situation where you just parachute in, work on a matter, work on a case, and then parachute back to your firm. These are people who you give advice to. You may have some very difficult, uncomfortable meetings with, but then you go and you sit down, and they're sitting there at the lunch table with you. Also, you're going to have to work with these people, hopefully, for years. So there's this sense of, all right, well, how do I balance that, maintain those relationships, but still fulfill my duty as a lawyer? The second thing is that you're an employee. So certainly you would like to see the company do really well. Maybe your stock options can grow. Maybe there's certain bonus targets that are within reach. But if there is a particular tactic or strategy or something that the business is doing that you think would be problematic from a legal perspective, you have to make that call. And that it's against self-interest somewhat, but fundamentally you have to do it. So with that as an overview of the in-house counsel position, some of the core competencies that I look for, first and foremost, is integrity. This is actually a lift from Warren Buffett, but he says the three things that he looks for when he hires people: it's integrity, intellect, and energy. He says of the three, the first is most important, integrity. He says because without integrity, intellect and energy will get you in trouble. Actually, what it says will get you killed, but it's absolutely true. It's absolutely true. You have someone sharp, full of energy, but they're not necessarily well-grounded in what's right and what's wrong. That is trouble waiting to happen. In addition to those attributes, when I'm looking for an in-house counsel, I'm looking for someone who has subject matter expertise. There's a reason you're there. In corporations, especially nowadays, we've gone through the org charts, we've gone through the personnel files. Everybody that is there, they're there for a reason. So if I have you there on my staff, I expect you to be my go-to person. And I'd like you to be my go-to person before I go to outside counsel. Again, you have better understanding of the business, and hopefully you also have the core functional expertise. Kind of steps in the same thing with respect to the knowledge of the business. Have to be solution oriented. I hear this from clients all the time, internal clients all the time, about they wish the lawyers understood the business better and they were more solution oriented. What happens a lot is it's easy for lawyers to fall into the trap of you go out, you find out what the legal answer is, and you come back and you plop it on the client's desk. The client still doesn't really know what to do with it, and that's not really solving their problem. What they're looking for from in-house counsel is to understand what the issues are or what the goals are that the client is trying to achieve, and then you go out and you figure out a way for that to happen within the boundaries of the law. The last two things I want to touch on is emotional intelligence, and that's just the ability to read a situation, read people. Again, key to being in-house is you're establishing long-term relationships, hopefully with your client. Relationships that are based on trust. The only way you're going to get that is that you really do have to have very good communication skills. Sit down with people, talk to them. You also have to be able to understand the different pressures that, if a marketing person comes in and they seem out of their mind over getting a particular issue, you have to understand why, or what that's coming from, and not necessarily just respond as you might want to respond, but rather respond in a way that's going to be positive and actually help build the business, help them achieve their goals within reason, and also protect the company. Finally, I just want to mention judgment. What we do on a daily basis is just apply judgment. The law will get you, but so far, I find that for the bulk of my in-house career, you're usually operating in a space where it's not a safe harbor that you're operating in. It's not something that is clearly illegal, so you're kind of in this gray area. So now what do you do? And that's, it's just judgment. Now, how do you develop judgment? I think early on in your career, you want to put yourself, do your work as a lawyer, find out what the laws are, but then ask yourself, okay, if I were the person that had to make the call on this one, what would I do? And just the more you do it, the more comfortable you get exercising your judgment. But it is a frustration to find relatively senior lawyers who might be very good at finding the law for you, but then they can't tell you what to do with it. And that's, again, I'm busy, everybody else is busy, do your job, get in there and find some answers. If you do all those things over the course of your career, ultimately this might be a path for you to get to general counsel. There are all types of commentators about what the appropriate role of general counsel is and things like that. This is not the time for that. What I'm talking about here, there are essentially 4 big buckets where I can say most of my time gets allocated over the course of a day, week, month, what have you. First are the substantive legal issues. It varies from over time, but anywhere from 20% to 100% of my time can be spent on legal issues. What I've also done is, at least in the departments that I've led, I've set up practice groups. So I have an M&A practice group, I have a litigation practice group, I have an IP practice group, whatever. These are all the subject matter experts that I have on staff. So if an issue gets presented to me, I'm able, even if I can't handle it, I'm able to go and find somebody on staff who I can deflect that particular issue to and get some guidance. That works for my current company. For other companies that I work for, I've lined them around geographies. So a few years ago when I was doing all the traveling to all the different countries globally, the business was set up along geographic lines. So we had a president for North America, a president for Latin America, a president for Europe, Middle East, and Africa, one for Asia. I had VPs for legal for each of those groups reporting into me, and then had different lawyers in individual countries that all reported up. What you want to do is just follow the business. But again, if you find yourselves in one of those practice groups, you are there for a reason. You're supposed to be the expert on Latin America. So a bunch of different countries, but you're supposed to be familiar with what those legal challenges that are coming up in those markets, any developments in law. You're supposed to have the relationships with the outside counsels in those places. Because again, if something comes up, I need you to be on top of it. Same thing with the practice group. Something comes up in the IP space, I'm going to call the IP lawyer. They're going to handle it. Anyway, the second big bucket is department management. What is painfully clear is that as a general counsel, you're only good as your people in your department, because again, ultimately everything rolls up to you. So you might be a crackerjack general counsel, but if you're not paying attention, making sure that your people are getting developed, making sure that they're getting the training opportunities that they need to get, if something gets mishandled, ultimately it's your responsibility. So I think that gets underemphasized in a lot of companies, a lot of departments, but that is something that I spend an awful lot of time on. Same thing with respect to budget. More and more, the legal budget is growing in terms of importance or impact on the overall corporate budget. So CFOs and just business people in general are really expecting legal departments to be much more tuned and much more focused on properly managing their budget. The third big bucket is focusing on business operational issues. What we're starting to see more and more is that the general counsel and lawyers in general are being invited to participate on business staff. So it's, for example, I sit on our executive management team. That's where we're dealing with a lot of corporate strategy issues, completely non-legal issues, frankly. But what they're looking for is senior people who are knowledgeable of the business, who might have different perspectives, who are able to sit around the table and figure out how best to guide the company. In some companies, what we're seeing is that that is also cascading down. So not just at the general counsel, CEO level, but then 2-3 clicks down from that, even down at the brand team level or the business unit level. They have lawyers who support that particular business unit, would be part of that business unit management team. I am a huge proponent of that, and that is something that I think has been critical to my development as a lawyer, just in terms of being able to give nuanced advice and knowledgeable guidance to our corporate team. The fourth big bucket really has to do with corporate governance, so that's we're dealing with the board of directors. And again, whether it's a public company, private company, there is a board out there somewhere. What's interesting is the company that I work for now is based in Japan, so they have a very different corporate governance structure than what we have here in the U.S. But at the end of the day, it's the same thing. You have a senior group that is watching or monitoring the activities of the operational team. Now, there are some other common functions that general counsels often take on. So the ethics office might report into them, the compliance office, things like that. That's all important, but really, I think the 4 big buckets that I just mentioned, most general counsels and across most industries, that's where their time will be spent. Now, there are a number of different business trends that I see that are going to affect the in-house practice of law. The 3 that I'm going to talk about here today, the globalization, the focus on cost and efficiencies, and rapid technological innovation. I don't think they're a surprise to anyone here. They're not necessarily new. But these are trends that are not going to go anywhere. These are trends that I think they're already having an impact on the in-house practice of law. They will, I think, continue to have an even more profound impact going forward. So now, with respect to continued globalization, the reason I think it is not going to go anywhere is that essentially 2 reasons. One, companies are always looking for growth. So for many companies, whether based here in the U.S. or based outside the U.S., they may have come to the conclusion that their domestic market has been fully commercialized, and that they're not going to be able to obtain the growth that they're seeking by remaining in the current market. So as a result of that, what they do, they go work, or they go look to enter other markets. So there's been an awful lot of talk over the past several years about the BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China. People would see opportunities for significant growth. I think that's right, you're going to see that. But the other big issue why I think we're going to continue to see continued globalization is that there really is a need for talent at all levels of an organization. What my experience has been is that even at the very senior levels of the company, down to the entry levels of the company, there is a real openness to companies to consider employees who might not come from the United States, who might not be trained in the U.S. educational system. But what they're seeking is just people who are very talented, very bright, very driven. And I don't see that going away anytime soon. With respect to the second big trend I was talking about, the intense focus on cost and efficiencies, business really is not that complicated. There are two ways that you're going to make more money. One, you're either going to grow your revenues, or two, you're going to decrease your costs. That's it. So that's a pocket MBA for lawyers there. So as companies try to grow revenues, that's where you see things like continued globalization. But with respect to the decrease in costs, what you see is that companies are just really going through all the functions within the organization to see if there's a way that they can do things more efficiently, do things less expensively, and that's just not going to change. The third trend is the rapid changes we're seeing in technology. Some of it has to do with automation of lots of things that used to require manual labor. It used to be, I'll call it non-skilled labor positions were going away, but more and more we're starting to see some of these advances in technology advancing or starting to impact some more skilled positions, including lawyers. So, what are some of the competencies that you need if you're going to be able to respond to some of these trends that we're seeing? First, with respect to globalization, I think there are two key competencies that it would be in your interest to try to develop. The first is that you really want to get some exposure to non-U.S. legal systems. Whether you are a lawyer working for a U.S. company that is seeking to enter a market outside the U.S., or if you're working for a company based outside the U.S. that is coming into the U.S. market. Either way, you're going to need to be able to understand the laws that are impacting your business wherever you're doing it. How do you get that type of exposure? Obviously, something like an expat assignment, like a substantive one, not just you go and you tour Europe or something like that, but where you're actually sitting there doing substantive legal work that is not necessarily focused on the U.S. If you're unable to get an expat assignment, you might want to see if you can't get staffed on some of these cross-border transactions if you're on the transactional side of the business. If you're on the litigation side, you might want to find a way if you can get staffed on a big multi-country litigation. Depending on the type of firm that you go to, that is actually a growth area for a number of the law firms that we're seeing, because that is the type of work, it's very high end for the billing rates that firms are trying to receive or charge these days. That's the type of work that typically the clients are willing to pay for the more sophisticated work. So if you do go to one of the law firms, this is a good opportunity for you to get that type of work. The second thing, or the second big impact that continued globalization is going to have is that I think it will be critical, no matter where you fall on the political scale with respect to belief in diversity or what have you. But I think you really do need a true understanding of and appreciation for multiculturalism. Again, the function of in-house, it really is based on developing trust and relationships with your in-house clients. The only way you're going to do that is that you're going to have to understand what their cultural norms are. You're going to have to understand what some of the business expectations, what the business culture is. Without that, you will be isolated. It's just not going to work. Second thing is that there is a very good probability that you're going to work with or significantly for someone that doesn't look like you, share your background, share your culture, your perspective, and that the person who loses in that situation, if you don't learn to embrace differences, will be you. Because whether you're working at an entry-level job or at a very high-level position, if you don't understand your boss, if you don't respect them, if you don't appreciate them for who they are, that is not going to be a long-term position for you. It's just not a winning posture you're putting yourself in. Same thing with respect to if you have a senior position where you might have lawyers working for you in different countries. In one of my positions, I had lawyers based in 28 different countries. For me to expect them to respond to every situation as would an American lawyer, that doesn't make any sense. But ultimately, again, I'm responsible for them. So what I need to do is figure out a way, what do I need to do to motivate them to perform at their best? Because if I don't do that, then I'm failing my job and I'm failing the company. And it's just, again, that is not a recipe for success. The second trend, and I'm sensitive to time here because I do want to save some time for questions at the end. The second trend is this focus on cost and efficiencies. There are a couple of different skill sets that I think you might want to develop, and they're not necessarily that obvious. With the focus on costs and trying to improve efficiencies, companies are very focused on labor costs. For most companies, labor costs are a significant expense item for them. So what we're seeing is some of these non-traditional work arrangements where people are working remotely, people are doing job shares, contractors, things like that. It's even coming to the law department. Lawyers typically are not particularly skilled managers to begin with. I think as we see these new, this new workforce, that's going to present an even greater challenge for lawyers. So to the extent as you embark on your careers, if you're able to stay focused on what are the management skills to really understand how to motivate, how to get the best performance from a changing workforce, I think that would put you way ahead, certainly from lawyers of my generation, and I think it will be a skill set that will certainly be valued by companies going forward. Staying under the concept of developing managerial skills, it will be helpful if you're able to develop project management skills, and by that, traditionally how it's worked when a legal matter has come in to a law department, whether it's a deal that you're going to work through or whether it's a big litigation that comes in. Historically, the in-house counsel, they would retain outside counsel. Outside counsel would then essentially handle the matter from soup to nuts. In-house counsel would be involved in managing it and watching it, things like that, but it was essentially a one-stop shop. They'd go to that one provider. What we're seeing now is that a lot of these projects are being unbundled, and what that just means is that they're being segmented. So in a litigation, for example, instead of just going to one firm and asking that firm to handle all stages of the litigation, you might go to one firm and they'll help you with the strategy. Another firm might actually be responsible for, or even it's not a law firm, but they'd be responsible for the electronic discovery portion of it. You might seek to have a separate counsel handle settlement discussions during the course of litigation. But in any event, what you have many different vendors now involved in this matter. So it requires some skillful juggling on the part of the in-house lawyer to make sure that the matter gets handled well. Staying with, again, the cost and efficiencies, another skill that I think would be valued going forward is really this mastery of business analytics. It used to be that the legal process or just what lawyers did was something of a black box, that the clients didn't really necessarily understand what was going on. So lawyers would come in, they present the bill to the client. I'm sorry, they would present the bill in-house, and the finance team or the business executives would say, okay, well, it's just an expensive legal bill. What's interesting, and this is really dating myself, when I first started practicing, law firms would submit bills. It would just say for services rendered, and then there'd be a number. And you just pay it. And that's, that has gone away. So that's, and it's gone away with respect to in-house counsel dealing with that. In-house dealing with outside, but it's even going away with respect to in-house counsel dealing with the executive management team. So what that means is that we really need to show the value that we're bringing to the company in a way or in a vernacular that the company or the business executives are familiar with. The key takeaway here is that there are a number of different metrics that are now being developed. There are a number of companies that are focused just on helping in-house legal staff analyze the budgets, figure out where the spend is going, figuring out where there might be inefficiencies. That is starting to become an expectation with respect to the appropriate management of the law department. And again, this is relatively new. There are some companies that are from firms that are doing this, but it is not as widespread as I think it will be in the coming years. The third point that I wanted to bring here is just the need for an innovative mindset. We literally have been talking about the inefficiencies of the hourly billing model, how it rewards or incentivizes inefficiency. We've been seeking an alternative to this billing rate or this billing, hourly billing for literally decades. It's still here. It is still the way that most companies pay their outside lawyers. What we're starting to see is greater use of things like flat fees, fixed fees, risk sharing arrangements, things like that. But it is not nearly, I think, as significant as what it's going to become in the future. There's one, this ACC Value Champions. I can't find my clicker here, my pointer here, but the American or the Association of Corporate Counsel. Every year they put together essentially it's a contest where companies can submit some of the more creative ways that they are partnering with their outside law firms to figure out ways to bring value other than through the hourly billing method. Some of them are really creative. I would encourage you to take a look at that because some of the things that, or some of the models that are being developed now, right now they're cutting edge. I think 5 years, 10 years from now, certainly 20 years from now, they're not going to be cutting edge. They're going to be pretty standard. So to the extent you can get your arms around them now, figure them out, and possibly figure out ways to further advance them. Again, that puts you ahead of a lot of your peers. The other thing, again, with respect to keeping an innovative mindset, is you really want to not necessarily be wedded to how we've done things traditionally. You're really looking to figure out if there's a way to re-engineer the legal services delivery model. What we're seeing more and more because part of the mismatch between what we're seeing, how many lawyers are being made every year versus the number of new jobs that are being made every year, we're starting to see more and more, I call them legal entrepreneurs. And this is people who are not working in a traditional role, either in a law firm or in-house or government or something like that. But they are trying to figure out a way how they might be able to provide some type of service associated with companies' legal needs. So we're seeing a lot of these LPOs, we're seeing virtual firms, online services, things like that. Same thing, the GCLA, that was my old company. And that again, that was an approach just to figure out a way to apply legal services, but in a way that I think was more economical, in a way that really did bring greater value to companies. The third and final trend that I want to talk about is just some of the practice competencies that would be helpful in dealing with technology. It's a pretty basic point that I have, and that is you just really do need to understand and embrace the new technology as it's introduced for two reasons. First, again, lawyers operate in a service capacity. So in order for us to properly represent our clients, we need to understand the nature of their challenges. If they're going to adopt new technologies, we need to figure out what some of the risks are that might be associated with it. Riding in the car this morning, I was listening to a story about Apple's introduction of their new iPhones. And one of the things that they have on there is it's a fingerprint security thing. Sounds cool. As a lawyer, you sit there and you say, man, how's that going to work? Because now if my company distributes iPhones to our employees and now they're putting their fingerprints on there, I think we have access to their fingerprints. There's a privacy issue with that. I'm not sure if Apple is even capturing them. We already know, there's been a lot of discussion about NSA having a backdoor into Apple's things. There is a legal issue associated with that there. I went to a meeting, this is a couple years ago, where the IT guy was in there. He was talking about how we were switching over our phone system from an analog system to a digital system. Everyone was excited because lots of bells and whistles. You could do all this, and you get your voicemail could show up as an email and all that. As a lawyer in the room, I was excited, but then I said, you know what? It presents a real issue because now when we get sued, we have to produce all the electronic records. So we have to produce emails and things like that. If now voicemails are now being transcribed into electronic documents, now we have to save all of our voicemails. Now, a lot of pouring cold water there. Many people aren't real thrilled with that comment, but it's real. So what we're seeing is there are some real substantive legal issues that these new technologies are putting on lawyers' plates. And again, the only way you're going to properly represent your client is you have to get out front of that a little bit. You have to work closely with your IT departments. You have to understand what is coming your way. The second point with respect to technology, and this ties into the earlier point about finding ways to reduce costs, there are some technologies that are specifically focused in assisting lawyers better manage their cost center. So things like billing software, predictive coding. Billing software, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, how it used to work, outside law firms would submit a bill to you. The responsible lawyer would have to sit there and go through the bill line by line and look for anything that looked like it was an improper charge. Now that's done electronically. The bill comes in, it runs through, it runs through the screen set up by the software, and any non-conformities will pop right away. So that saves an awful lot of lawyer time, and frankly, it's probably more accurate than what you were getting before. Predictive coding. This has to do with document review. As a young lawyer, I spent countless hours in warehouses, much bigger than this one, just going through banker's boxes full of documents, trying to figure out what documents are relevant, which ones are privileged, things like that. Now with predictive coding, you can enter in some key search terms. A company can scan the documents, and out pops a list of your hot documents, your relevant documents, whatever screen you put it up against. So what we're seeing, it's saving a huge amount of time. The impact there, though, it does concern me because I think you really do lose a training opportunity for younger lawyers. But for the rates that a lot of these younger lawyers are being charged out at, I'm not sure as a purchaser of those services I even want that. So anyway, what we're also seeing is tools that are helping with signal detection, trend analysis, things like that. And that helps you do your job as a lawyer in terms of trying to anticipate problems before they occur. In-house departments traditionally have served more in a reactive position, that a problem would pop up, then they would go out and manage it. Now there's an expectation that you'll go out there and serve in more of a preventative role, which makes an awful lot of sense just given the current business environment. So just want to wrap up, and again, it's very conscious of the time. I really do think that this is an exciting time to be entering the industry. It is not without challenge. I don't deny that at all. But I really do think, particularly for lawyers who are at the high end of the practice, I think there are going to be some real opportunities for you. And it's exciting because there are so many winds of change that are buffeting the profession right now, that you will have a real opportunity to come in and make a real impact, make some real changes. So I close with the idea that the skill sets that in-house lawyers have today, I don't think they're going away. You will need to master all those things that everyone has in their toolbox now. But in addition to those, I think you really will need to stay focused on trying to figure out how you can acquire and develop some additional skills. So with that, I will stop it there. I have a few minutes for questions.
Yeah.
Okay, one of the things I'm hearing, which I agree with wholeheartedly, is the need to be able to give business advice, but where do you get it, since the odds of learning in law school, if you don't aggressively pursue the electives, are low. So where do you recommend, other than making the third year better supported by business courses?
That's a curriculum issue, and I think that might not be a bad idea. In terms of if you're in private practice, frankly, I think it's difficult because the work that you're getting as an associate in a law firm is typically, it's a very discrete project that you're being assigned to work on. So the idea that you're going to be able to go out and really understand, get an in-depth exposure to the client's business is not great. The one thing that, and I don't know how open firms are to this, but even to the management of the law firm itself, because law firms are very much businesses these days. So to the extent that there's an opportunity to just understand how your firm works, and because firms are looking at many of these same issues, they're being impacted by many of these same trends, that would be a great opportunity. The other thing that might present an opportunity is in a pro bono aspect. If you're able to represent some of these small businesses that might be eligible for some type of pro bono assistance to a clinic or something like that, that would be an opportunity. It's now I hadn't really thought about it, but now that you mention it, I've represented a nonprofit for a few years, and was fundamentally involved in how this nonprofit was being run. And even though it was a nonprofit, the issues are still the same.
Or within the firm, right? You're saying that you got to get up close because it was pro bono.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, they were glad to have me, but it's for a paying client. I don't know how thrilled they were.
Right.
With
It's
that.
hard to do.
Right.
So argues for Harvard kids to take legal analytics, which is their only deep business course, as a core requirement. I mean, young to learn how to read it. The thing that concerns me is how many people graduate unable to read a financial statement.
Right. Yeah, and that's critical because it's, again, you need to have mastery over the legal issues, but the business of whatever company you're working for, it's not to win the lawsuit, or it's not. I mean, what they're trying to do, they're trying to get the deal done. They're trying to get through this particular litigation. So, and that's something that's often lost on outside lawyers is that, listen, we care, we're trying to win in all this, but listen, this is not really our issue, our main focus here. Our main focus is elsewhere. And that's for, how do you get that?
Hard to get it.
Yeah.
I had a question about, at one point you said that, there's a challenge being in-house counsel because you're wearing two hats. You're the lawyer, but you're also part of the business.
Right.
And you said that can lead to conflict sometimes, and I guess in theory I can see how that could be. But I mean, in general, it would strike me that what's good for business is not violating the law because then the business gets in trouble later, and you
Yep.
know that. And so I guess my question is, what specific kinds of instances are you worried about? And then second, how do you develop like an in-house culture amongst your entire in-house staff so that everybody's on the same page about those issues?
Yeah, but to your first question, the concern is sometimes that, it's a horrible term, but is that the lawyers might be co-opted in that they stop focusing on their fundamental role, which is to serve as an independent, objective legal advisor, and they start viewing themselves as part of the business. So the business goals will take priority over perhaps some of the legal responsibilities. Frankly, what I do, I try to move lawyers within or across different businesses over time. So it gives the lawyers opportunities to develop relationships with a bunch of different business people in different functions. But it also, frankly, prevents them from becoming too embedded in the business where they start to become aligned with the business as opposed to the legal function. Second question?
No, that was the
Okay. Okay. I kind of merged them there. Okay. It's it's a great role, but it really does require some discipline. What I do in terms of just culture is we have the conversation from the time of quarterly staff meetings, and make it a point of reminding everyone what we're there to do, what our mission is, what our values are, things like that. Also, try to make sure that there is a real sense of community within the legal function, so that lawyers do not feel as though they're isolated, even if they may be sitting with their particular business unit or spending lots of time with their client, is that they still have a home to come back to. And that's, and one other thing is typically try to make sure that the lawyers always have reporting lines into the legal department. Lots of companies, whether it's the country manager or the GM or whether it's a business unit head, often they want everyone that works in their business unit reporting directly into them. I typically oppose that. And they might have a dotted line into whoever their client is, but I always want to make sure that they have a direct line into me, because again, that gives them an out. So if the lawyer finds that she is under undue pressure, she just feels uncomfortable saying no to a particular client or giving certain advice, she has an out because she says, well, listen, I had to tell my boss. So then, it comes to me, and then I can go in there and be the bad guy. But I always want to make sure that the real alignment is to the law department. Yes?
I just want to circle back on one of the points you mentioned, just with regards to change in billing practices, and just link that up to a couple of ideas. Is that having just recently come out of private practice now, I can echo the sentiment that law firms are very conscious about the fact that there is a need to be able to decrease fees, and as you mentioned, particularly with junior associates, about limiting their access to certain work, which is otherwise going to create exorbitant fees for banks and for some of our clients. And I guess one of the difficulties that we find as associates, or at an associate level, is that potentially denies us or bars us the opportunity to gain access to meaningful training opportunities. Mm-hmm. And I just, for me, what I find somewhat irreconcilable in terms of conceptualizing and changing the structure of the legal profession do you believe that there's an expectation then that those are the types of skill subsets that we would otherwise be exposed to whilst in private practice or in our capacity as a VP, perhaps in-house, that those are typically skills that we should be imbued with before you're leaving law school, because now we're being denied these opportunities in practice because of these new billing constraints?
Yeah, ideally, I just don't know how realistic that is.
Right.
Because a lot of this, it's not like management. You can read a management book, but until you have a bunch of people reporting into you, you're just not going to develop the managerial skills for how do you deal with that person versus that person versus that person, but make sure everyone is still on board. I think the training opportunities or the decreasing training opportunities, that is a real challenge for younger lawyers. Now, whether there might be an opportunity as you become more senior in your firm to possibly manage some of the support staff, the paralegals, some of the junior associates, things like that, focus on that. Traditionally, I don't know that there's been a whole lot of time spent on the specifics of how best to manage your paralegal group or how best to manage a junior group. One of the things that struck me after leaving private practice and going to work for a company was the amount of time that senior management spent focused on people issues. Just trying to figure out how can we make sure that we are properly incentivizing people, how are we properly motivating people, really how are we making sure that we're getting more than just what people are obligated to do, but we have their hearts and minds here, that they are committed, they're really trying to do what's best for the company. What surprised me was that in law firms, we talked about it, we knew, you got to do it. It was not, it was a tremendous amount of, and I mean from, the CEO, the direct reports, these are folks sitting around spending days just talking about management issues, people management issues. And I don't recall ever seeing that in a law firm. And so I think the opportunities are limited. Again, I think that is some of the creativity that is going to be required for this generation of lawyer is to try to figure out, okay, listen, if those are the skills that I'm going to need to develop, where am I going to get opportunities to do that? So I don't have an answer, but it is clearly an issue.
Al, I want to say thank you very much. This is incredibly helpful, both to lay out the framework, but also to provide your experience. And thank you very much for coming to share it with us. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
My pleasure.
That was great.